A solidão de Clara era como o vento cortante que assobiava pelo rancho isolado. Vestígios de cinzas da última fogueira se misturando ao silêncio pesado da noite. Cercada por olhos hostis e ameaças veladas, sua existência se resumia a um fio tênue entre a esperança e o desespero. Uma mulher presa em fronteira bruta que não perdoava fraquezas. Redonda, mal resistia ao tempo e ao descaso. Madeira crua marcada por cicatrizes de batalhas silenciosas contra tempestades de areia e silêncios perturbadores. O crepitar distante de galhos quebrando trouxe à mente de Clara o perigo constante, como se o deserto conspirasse em seu redor. O cheiro da poeira seca misturava-se ao suor frio que lhe escorria na nuca, lembrando-a da urgência de decisões que não podia mais adiar. Clara, ainda jovem, de olhos que carregavam a fragilidade de quem já viu demais, vivia, enclausurada em sua própria fortaleza. O medo dos colonos e pistoleiros era tão palpável quanto o peso da solidão. Ele os colocava como predadores invisíveis à espreita, e ela, presa a um passado de perdas, sabia que a sobrevivência exigia sacrifícios dolorosos. A cada noite, o silêncio não era descanso, mas ameaça velada, recordando-lhe a fragilidade de sua existência isolada. O inevitável aconteceu, quando a aliança que poderia garantir proteção bateu à sua porta. Taji era um guerreiro Apache, cuja reputação atravessava vales e planícies com igual parte de temor e respeito. Sua presença firme, envolta em uma aura de mistério e cálida ferocidade, ofereceu a Clara um contrato sombrio. Um casamento que não seria fruto do amor, mas da necessidade. Um pacto selado contra o branco inclemente que caía sobre a fronteira. A tensão cultural entre eles era palpável, uma linha tênue, onde o medo, a suspeita e a esperança se entrelaçavam perigosamente. Na cerimônia, nada além do essencial foi dito. O ar carregava odores de ervas queimadas e terra úmida, sobrepondo-se à rigidez dos olhares e à apreensão mútua. Cada gesto, cada silêncio fazia ecoar o peso do passado e das batalhas não declaradas. Clara observava o semblante fechado de Taji, ressurgindo fragmentos de histórias guardadas em sua postura austera, ameaças veladas, segredos antigos. A cerimônia, simples e austera, no entanto, era um campo de batalhas invisíveis onde cada sensação se fazia guerra. Quando a noite finalmente os envolveu em sua penumbra silenciosa, Clara sentiu o peso do mundo cair sobre seus ombros. No olhar sombrio e reservado de Taji, ela encontrou algo mais que desconfiança, um passado oculto, uma sombra que não podia ignorar. O silêncio entre eles era denso, carregado de significados não ditos, até que, rompendo a quietude quase sufocante, ele decidiu revelar a verdade que vinha soterrando sob a couraça de guerreiro. Uma verdade chocante que mudaria o curso da aliança e de suas vidas para sempre. Muitos companheiros de jornada que acompanham nossas lendas por estas terras esquecidas nos contaram que o destino, ou o algoritmo traiçoeiro do YouTube, às vezes desfaz suas inscrições sem aviso, antes que a próxima trilha perigosa se revele e uma nova reviravolta aconteça. Dê uma espiada rápida aí embaixo do vídeo e garanta que você ainda está inscrito em nosso bando para não perder o fio da meada. Não queremos que você perca nenhuma das vozes que ecoam deste vale. Verifique sua inscrição agora e junte-se à nossa saga. In the heavy silence of their shared night, Taji's shadow moved closer to the flickering firelight that barely penetrated the rough cabin's corners. His gaze, once guarded and distant, softened as he began to speak. Words like stones rolled carefully over dry earth, deliberate and slow. Clara listened, her breath shallow, heart hammering in the fragile space between them. "I am not just the warrior you see," Taji said quietly, his voice weighted with something unspoken for so long. "I carry a punishment within my bloodline, a sentence whispered among my people. I was cast out, branded by my own tribe, not for weakness, but for a choice they called betrayal." His eyes searched hers, demanding understanding, or at least patience. The fire cast deep shadows under his cheekbones and over the scar that marred his left temple, a remnant from battles not against enemies outside, but ghosts within. Clara swallowed hard, the tension between suspicion and empathy twisting inside her. She could feel the walls she'd built around herself trembling in the company of his truth. The very fact he dared share this secret was a fragile offering, a gesture of trust in this harsh world that threatened to swallow them whole. "What happened?" she whispered, her voice barely a thread. Taji exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing down. "I tried to end a cycle of bloodshed. My tribe was locked in vendettas that would spill more innocent lives. I reached out to our enemies in peace. For that, I was branded a traitor. I became an exile, hunted by those who once called me brother." His confession hung heavy in the smoke-scented air. Clara's mind raced. The danger was no longer just the white men's guns, or the cold distrust surrounding their union. It was a deeper, darker storm. A war waging inside Taji's own heart and history. A war that could consume them both. Her own scars and losses flashed before her eyes. A family torn apart, trust shattered. Yet, beneath that, a stubborn ember of hope flared. She made a decision in the silence between his words and her own fears. To trust the man beside her, for survival, yes, but also for something perhaps more fragile, a chance at understanding and alliance. As the first pale fingers of dawn crept beneath the cabin's door, they rose to face a world that seemed suddenly couched in peril. Outside, the brittle dawn's light barely stirred the dust when movement in the distance caught Clarence's sharp eyes. Figures emerged from the swirling morning haze, a gang of pistoleros, their silhouettes ragged and relentless, notorious for their merciless pursuit of Apaches. Taji's hand found hers, steady, fierce, grounding her in the encroaching storm. "They seek me," he said simply. "And if they find me here, they'll bring ruin to you as well." Clara's pulse quickened, terror and determination binding in her veins. The fragile trust, forged in whispered truths, was about to be put to the ultimate test. They moved swiftly, shadows among shadows, heartbeats synced with the soft crunch of dry leaves. Every step forward was a dance with death, and every breath tasted like dust and desperation. The pistoleros advanced like a pack of wolves, their hoarse voices carrying cruel promises of blood and capture. Taji's knowledge of the land was their guide, each ridge and ravine a temporary shield. Yet the dawn revealed the terrain's merciless truths, barren patches where no refuge could be found, and narrow passes that funneled them into deadly confines. Clara's muscles burned with the strain of keeping pace, fighting the rising fear that threatened to choke her resolve. Between hurried breaths, Taji spoke of his exile, of nights spent hiding beneath stars that offered no comfort, of betrayals that painted targets on his back. Clara saw a man fractured, not by weakness, but by boundless will, wearied by relentless pursuit. In return, she shared the hollow ache of her losses, family torn apart by greed and prejudice, a life shattered by cruelty. Their confessions, whispered like fragile vows, wove a tenuous tapestry of mutual pain and gritty determination. As they rounded a rocky outcrop, the rough baying of dogs and the crack of rifles echoed through the valley below. Their pursuers were gaining ground, relentless and merciless. The sun had climbed higher, stripping away the safety of shadows. Breathing ragged and hands torn from clinging to sharp brush, the pair found a narrow ledge above a steep ravine, a precarious refuge. They pressed their backs to the sun-beaten rock face, hearts pounding in fierce unison. "It's no longer only my past hunting us," Taji murmured, eyes dark and fierce. "It's something bigger. Gasoline on tinder. Old rivalries and newer threats all igniting." Clara's hand tightened on his, the gravity of their shared fate sinking deep. For all the danger pressing in, for all the hate circling like vultures, they clung to this fragile alliance, a flicker of hope against the consuming night. The pistoleros were close now, voices rough and full of menace, bouncing off the canyon walls. Their plans were intertwined with Taji's exile, with Clara's stake in survival. They had no choice but to flee or face annihilation. Beyond the treacherous paths they had traversed, the future held no promises, only uncertainty sharp as a knife's edge. But one thing was clear: together, they would face whatever came next. And as the first pistol shots cracked the quiet morning, it became painfully clear. They were not alone, and the hunt was just beginning. The jagged rocks had barely settled beneath their boots when Clara's breath hitched, a sharp reminder of the griddle line they now walked between survival and demise. The mountains loomed, merciless and unyielding, their slopes carved by endless winds, dust swirling like restless spirits in the thin air. Each step was a gamble, the weight of uncertainty pressed heavier than the packs they carried. Taji's gaze was steady, scanning the horizon as the sun struggled to pierce the dense fog curling through the valleys. His voice broke the silence, a low, measured cadence that seemed carved from stone and shadow. "This land, it is not kind to the weary. We must keep moving." Clara nodded, her throat tight with more than just the cold. She stumbled over a root, letting out a soft curse, but the pain was minor compared to the gnawing fear nesting behind her ribs. Beside her, Taji moved with a grace honed by years of knowing these mountains, the weight of exile etched into every measured stride. As they pressed deeper into the fold of the rugged landscape, Taji's stories came in fragments, laced with more sorrow than anger. "The men who once called me brother now hunt me," he said, his eyes darkening like a storm waiting to burst. "My choice, peace where there was only blood, marked me for death. Clara's hands clenched around the worn straps of her satchel. Her own losses remained buried beneath a fragile shell of resilience. But hearing Taji's confession opened a fissure, a shared wound pulsing beneath their skins. "I lost my family to greed," she whispered, her voice trembling with the memory. "To hatred that grows like weeds in dry soil." That confession bridged the chasm between them, the veil of suspicion lifting just enough to reveal a flicker of understanding. For a moment, they walked not as a desperate woman and a hunted warrior, but as two souls scarred by a cruel world. But the mountains bore no mercy. The sudden crunch of footsteps against dry leaves and cracked twigs snapped them back into the relentless reality. Clara's eyes widened. Fresh tracks marred the dusty ground ahead. The pistoleros were closer than they had hoped. Their footsteps fierce, unyielding. She swallowed hard, the cold bite of adrenaline flooding her veins. Taji bent low, tracing the prints with a practiced eye. "They know this terrain. One among them has followed me before." His voice was calm, but the undercurrent was undeniable. A warning drenched in urgency. An oppressive silence settled as they pressed onward, the weight of hunted shadows pressing ever tighter. The wind tore through the eaves of the sparse trees, carrying soft echoes of distant voices. Clara tightened her grip on Taji's arm. He was her anchor in the whirlpool of fear now pulling them under. "When I left my people," he said, his breath fogging in the chilly air, "there were those who called for my death for breaking the code. They believe bloodshed is the only language that can be spoken." His gaze caught hers, fierce and raw. "I broke that chain, and now that chain seeks to shackle me forever." She wanted to ask what that meant beyond the obvious, but words failed her amid the heavy presence of wolves, not the beasts, but the hunters shadowing their every move. Clara's mind flicked back to the barren plains she had once called home, the cracked earth where her dreams had withered and died. Now, amidst the hostile embrace of the mountains, she found herself bound, not just by necessity, but by a growing thread of fragile empathy woven from shared pain. Their steps slowed as the terrain grew rougher. Sharp stones tore at Clara's boots. The biting wind carved icy fingers across her face. Yet, beneath the hardship, a simmering connection took root. Taji's silent strength, melding with Clara's stubborn resolve. As dusk dipped the world into muted grays, they found shelter. Beneath an outcrop, a jagged bulwark against the unforgiving sky. The fire they lit stabbed at the night's gloom, shadows flickering wildly across weathered faces. Taji's hands were steady, tending the small flames with care. "There is more than the pistoleros hunting us now," he murmured, eyes distant. "Old wounds bleed anew. Rivals from my tribe see my return as an opportunity to unsettle everything." Clara's fingers tightened around a small pendant, a keepsake from a world slipping away. "What kind of threat?" she asked quietly, the weight of uncertainty pressing upon her chest. He hesitated, gaze falling to the dancing flames. "The tribe's balance hangs by a thread. My presence, it unsettles the fragile peace between us and the whites. Some believe my exile should have been death, not exile. Others fear what alliances I might forge." The air grew colder as the reality seeped in. Their fight was not only against the harshness of the land or the pistoleros outside. It was against the invisible currents of betrayal and old hatreds rising like a tide to swallow them whole. "Then we have more than just survival to fight for," Clara said, her voice brittle but resolute. "We have hope to seize or lose." Taji offered a rare, fleeting smile. "Hope is the most dangerous thing, and the only thing worth chasing." The night deepened, stars prickling cold against the vast canvas above. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, sharpened their senses. The distant baying of hunting dogs echoed through the peaks, a cruel reminder that the darkness held many eyes and ears. Clara's heart pounded, a relentless drum beneath her ribs. "They're near," she whispered, eyes darting toward the shadowed ridges. "There, footprints fresh in the dirt. They're hunting us like animals." Taji's jaw clenched. "One of them," he murmured, lips barely moving, "knows my face, knows who I was and what I became." A cold wind swept across the ledge, carrying the scent of dust and threat. Clara forced her legs to move, steadying her breath against the chaos brewing inside and out. "They want to catch me," Taji said, voice low and hard. "And if they find me, it won't end with me alone." Her hand found his again, a lifeline anchoring them in the encroaching night. Their fates, stitched together by necessity and fragile trust, now hung trembling on the razor's edge. And as the first distant shouts shattered the mountain silence, Clara realized the true hunt had only just begun. The fading light filtered through the rugged shelter, casting long shadows that rippled against the weathered wood like restless spirits. Clara's eyes narrowed as the silhouette materialized from the gloom. A figure cloaked in dusk, her gaze sharp and unyielding. The woman emerged slowly, each step deliberate, heavy with unsaid intent. Her eyes, cold as the mountain stone, locked on to Taji's. The flicker of something unspoken drifted between them, warning, accusation, perhaps even challenge. Clara could sense the tension coiled tight, thick as the humidity before a desert storm. "I have come because you carry a burden much heavier than this land," the woman declared, voice low yet commanding. "Your presence here risks more than your own fate. It threatens the fragile peace between tribes and colonists alike." Taji's jaw tightened, eyes reflecting the flickering firelight and a long-held weariness. "I do not seek war," he replied evenly. "Only survival, ours and hers." The woman's gaze shifted to Clara, sharp and unreadable. "You are entangled in this now, outsider. What you carry is not just your own will to live. It is the tinder that might ignite flames long held at bay." Clara stood, breath steady, but heart hammering, as 1,000 unspoken dangers trickled coldly down her spine. She looked between the two warriors, one her husband by necessity, the other an emissary of shadowed threats she did not yet fully understand. "You speak of treaties held by fragile threads," she said slowly, voice steady despite the chaos thrumming beneath. "What danger do we face if those threads snap?" The woman's eyes darkened, storm clouds of warning gathering. "Blood debts long buried are waking. The rivalry in my tribe stirs anew, its embers fanned by those who see your husband as a threat to old orders. What you bear is more than exile. It is an earthquake beneath, the ground where all must tread lightly." Taji's gaze lowered briefly, the weight of unseen chains pressing down. They believe my return will unravel alliances painstakingly stitched together. Some desire my death to make sure of it. A silence, thick and suffocating, filled the cabin space. Clara's mind raced. What else had she stepped into when she agreed to this marriage of survival? Was the danger truly just the guns of the colonists? Or was it something deeper, far more unpredictable? The woman's voice cut through the quiet again, sharper this time. You and your bride carry a fate that could shatter the peace or forge a new path. But beware. The path ahead runs through shadows darker than any you faced before. Clara's fingers found Taji's hand, squeezing tightly. Her pulse thundered in her ears, a war drum greeting an unknown future. She saw the silent storm in Taji's eyes, the fierce resolve mingled with the scars of betrayal. Here lay more than lives at stake. Here were destinies intertwined by fragile hope and ancient wounds. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a distant howl that rapped like a warning. The fragile accords of this borderland trembled, ready to splinter beneath the weight of hidden enemies and long smoldering vendettas. Clara's voice broke softly. Then survival is not enough. We must choose carefully who we trust and what battles we unleash. Taji nodded slowly, the firelight catching the hard lines of his face. We stand on a knife's edge, but standing is all we can do. As the night wrapped them tightly in its cold embrace, the air thick with danger and secrets, Clara looked out beyond the shelter's meager protection. The world they'd fled to was no sanctuary. It was a precarious threshold where old rivalries met new alliances, where death and hope merged in equal measure. Her breath caught as a subtle sound teased the quiet, a faint shifting in the shadows beyond, cautious and purposeful. She and Taji exchanged a glance heavy with understanding. "You're not just running from men with guns anymore," Clara whispered, voice taut. "There's a war here we barely see." Taji's steady hold on her hand was the only certainty in a world alight with threats both visible and unseen. The fragile bond they'd forged was about to be tested in ways they could not yet imagine. Their sanctuary had become a battleground of shadows. The delicate balance of a region's survival trembled beneath their feet, fragile as a thread ready to snap. And Clara knew, with creeping dread and stubborn resolve alike, the secrets they carried threatened to ignite a storm far greater than either had expected. The weight of judgment pressed heavily on Taji's shoulders as he returned to the heart of his tribe, a place once familiar, but now as foreign as the cold wind cutting through the canyon. Whispers followed his steps, voices sharpened by suspicion and ancient grudges, laced with the venom of betrayal long buried but never healed. Inside the dim circle of the council fire, Taji found more than silent stares. The elder's eyes burned with accusation, recalling secrets better left hidden, resentments twisted from years of exile and exile-born fear. The murmurs filled the space between the flames, accusing him not only of his past transgression, but of endangering the fragile peace others had fought to build. Clara, somewhere close but still outside this harsh gathering, felt the chill of their glances. Rumors had already begun to swirl like dust in a desert storm, of the woman who married an Apache out of desperation, dragging unknown threats into the tribe's midst. She heard the sharp words of a few pistoleros who had come seeking her, voices dripping with scorn and menace. "What keeps you clinging to that Apache blood?" one sneered, stepping close enough that Clara could feel the rancid breath. "You'd do better to ditch him before his enemies drag you both to the gallows." Another spat on the dusty ground. "Marriage won't hide the stains of his past. There's no honor in it, only death waiting." Clara's fingers curled tightly around the grip of her revolver, hidden beneath her skirt. But her heart pounded with more than fear. It beat with fierce defiance. She met each leer with silence as sharp as a knife. In her silence spoke the truth. Survival sometimes demanded choosing the enemy's hand over abandonment. Meanwhile, Taji fought harder battles beyond the reach of outsiders' eyes. His name was a knife swinging wildly in the dark, a judicious tribe divided between those calling for his death and others whispering for his quiet banishment. Each council meeting became a war of wills. Every word weighed, as if tipping some hidden scale that balanced life and death. With every passing day, the threat outside grew. News came of a colonist patrol, armed and relentless, bearing orders to capture any Apache wandering beyond tribal lands. The patrol moved like a shadow, growing longer with the sinking sun, a looming certainty that would bring bullets and chains. Taji's voice was low when he shared the news with Clara beneath a starless sky. "They come for me, but they will bring ruin to us both if they find me here." His hands, steady and rough as stone, took hers in a grasp forged by necessity and more fragile hopes. Clara's reply was bare of doubt, despite the cold biting the air. "Then we must move before the night carries their guns to our doorstep." But the danger was not only from laws wielded by men in distant offices. It was something more immediate, feral, and brutal. One dark afternoon, as the canyon sun hid behind heavy clouds, the sharp whistle of an alarm shattered their uneasy calm. The rival faction within the tribe, emboldened and acting with deadly intent, launched a sudden attack on their shelter. Gunshots screamed out, ripping the fragile veil of quiet. Clara barely had time to drag Taji behind the sheltering rocks as bullets tore into the dry earth. Mere inches from their skins, heart hammering, breath ragged. She could hear the wild cries of the attackers, a mix of tribal betrayal and the merciless desperation of those who saw Taji's downfall as their path to power. Taji's hand found the worn leather at his waist, fingers closing around the grip of his revolver, the line between hunter and hunted blurring with each breath. "Run," he commanded softly, locking eyes with Clara. "We cannot face them here. The mountain knows a path few others do." They fled like shadows, swallowed by the rocky embrace of the hills, every step a test of will against the relentless pursuit. The scent of gunpowder and dust clung to the air, mingling with the bitter tang of fear. Clara's mind raced as they scrambled toward a land neither knew, the uncharted, untamed territory whispered of only. In old stories, a refuge and a trap. Her thoughts collided. Could the hostile mountain hide them, or would it become their tomb? Behind them, the cries of their attackers grew more frantic, a storm gathering in chaotic waves. Their desperate flight was the final act of a fragile dance with destiny, bound by secrets, hunted by enemies from within their tribe and without, and driven by a shared will to survive. The uncertain wilderness ahead held no promises, but it was the only path left. And as they disappeared into the shadowed unknown, the howl of their pursuers, fading but never silenced, Clara knew with fierce clarity. They were no longer safe in any land they'd once called home. Their only hope lay beyond the borders of the known, into a new, perilous territory that promised either salvation or annihilation. The hunt was far from over. The weathered faces of the elders greeted Clara with a coolness that seemed to seep from the very stones beneath her feet. The narrow paths in the heart of the Apache elders' territory wound like veins through the rugged land, each step heavier than the last. She moved beside Taji, whose stance was guarded, the fire of past battles still smoldering quietly in his dark eyes. Despite this return to familiar grounds, the air was thick with unease, a reminder that belonging was not easily earned. As they entered the encampment, the muted murmur of voices dimmed to a hush. Women with tight lips and men with narrowed gazes watched her passage like a shadow drifting over sacred ground. Old warriors, whose wrinkles told stories of countless winters, cast cautious glances, their judgment silent but sharp. Clara felt the weight of alienation settle upon her, heavier than the rough cloak she bore against the chill. She was an outsider still, a blemish against the tribe's ancient tapestry. Taji's grip on her elbow tightened subtly, anchoring her through the unspoken hostility. His jaw was clenched, eyes flicking between leaders seated around the council fire, faces carved from stone and sorrow. These were men whose respect he once commanded, but who now viewed him as a liability, a ghost dragging shadows upon their fragile peace. The council leader's voice broke the silence, low and deliberate. You bring with you a woman from outside our ways. Her presence is a burden we must bear carefully. A ripple of assent meandered through the circle. Clara's breath caught. She had prepared for cold rejection, but the chill in their words burned deeper. Her name was whispered once, like a warning carried on a bitter wind, not welcome, yet impossible to ignore. Taji stepped forward, voice steady but edged with urgency. She stands with me, not as a foe, but as part of our survival. To reject her is to reject hope. Murmurs deepened, some edged with fear, fear of change, of alliances shifting beneath their feet. The past mistakes clung to Taji like a second skin, a stain not easily washed away by mere words. As night crept over the horizon, Clara was led to a modest lodge, its walls lined with woven hides and faded symbols of protection. She sank onto the wooden bench, every muscle taut from the day's tension. The door opened, and a young woman from the tribe stepped inside, her eyes sharp and assessing. You do not belong here, the woman said plainly, voice as cold as the mountain winds outside. Your blood is not ours, your past a shadow we cannot carry. Clara met the gaze without flinching. I came with no illusions, nor do I ask for blind acceptance. But I am here because the world made me choose survival over solitude. The woman's eyes narrowed, then flickered with something unreadable, perhaps grudging respect, or the faintest ember of understanding. Then survive, but know this: betrayal breeds in the silence between truths. Watch well whom you trust. Meanwhile, beneath the council's stern watch, Taji wrestled with his own storm. The whispers in the shadows of the lodge spoke of treachery. A faction within the tribe, long opposed to his return, conspired in silence. Their voices rose in secret, fueled by hatred that had not dulled with time. Voices that sought not just his downfall, but the complete unraveling of the fragile peace he represented. Word reached him of the colonist patrol, pressing ever closer, relentless in their mandate to capture any Apache wandering beyond agreed boundaries. The thought of chains and gunfire stoked the fire of urgency in his chest. To protect Clara, to protect them both, he knew they could not linger. But danger was not limited to strangers' guns. One evening, beneath a leaden sky, the howl of betrayal tore through the quiet. Shots shattered the night, the sharp report of gunfire, and the chaotic rush of figures breaking cover. Ambushers from within the tribe's ranks moved with deadly intent. Their attack, a ruthless arrow aimed straight at Taji's heart. Clara barely grabbed Taji's arm as bullets ricocheted around them, a bleak symphony of death and desperation. The fury in Taji's eyes was a tempest, but he knew this fight could not be. "One here. Run," he urged, voice low but fierce. "We cannot face them openly. Follow me." Through twisting paths carved by generations, they fled into the embrace of wild mountain slopes, where every shadow could harbor friend or foe. Clara's lungs burned with cold air and fear, muscles protesting the brutal pace. The lines between ally and enemy blurred, as distant cries echoed like specters of doom. In the sanctuary of a battered rock outcrop, Taji caught his breath, hands pressed hard against the rough stone. "This land is merciless," he said, voice worn but resolute, "but it hides secrets even the hunters may not know." Clara wiped dirt and sweat from her brow, eyes tracing the jagged silhouette of the mountains against the dimming light. "Is there a place left for us?" she asked quietly. "Or have we become ghosts on forgotten trails?" Before Taji could answer, borne on the cold wind, a voice sliced the night, a rough proposal steeped in old grudges and dire bargains. From the dark came a figure they both knew too well, his arrival a ripple threatening to drown what little safety remained. The enemy who once claimed Taji's blood as a debt arrived with a choice, a treacherous offer that could either save or shatter them utterly. The faint glow of dying embers cast long shadows, and under that wavering light, Clara met Taji's steady gaze. The fragile thread holding their alliance taut, strained against the weight of betrayal and harsh realities. The path ahead was no longer theirs to choose. It had been drawn by foes and fortunes alike. And as the cold mountain silence pressed in, that old enemy's voice echoed sharp and dry. "Choose wisely or be destroyed." Clara's footsteps no longer faltered as she moved through the encampment. though the weight of alien eyes pressed against her like the cold wind that swept the mountain paths. Each gaze was a blade, not sharpened with outright hatred, but with a quiet suspicion that cut just as deep. The women's lips were tightly pressed, men's brows furrowed in silent counsel. The elders' eyes were like frozen rivers, steady but unyielding. She was the outsider, the untamed element that threatened to spill over the ancient balance of this land. Beside her, Taji's grip on her arm tightened faintly, grounding her. His silhouette was a stoic wall amid the storm, unwavering despite the familiar but frosty reception. The council fire flickered between them, casting long, moving shadows that seemed to dance with the secrets and judgments swirling in the air. The faces gathered around them. Circle were drawn with years of endurance and war, etched deep with lines that told stories of loss and hard-won peace. But tonight, those stories folded around a new tension. You bring with you a woman from outside our ways. The elder's voice cracked like dry wood, low and heavy with meaning. Her presence is a burden we must bear carefully. The words fell like stones in Clara's chest. Her breath stuttered, a momentary sputter caught between anger and resignation. Whispers rippled through the crowd, soft yet sharp enough to sever fragile hopes. They murmured of betrayal, of danger lurking where trust should be planted. For Clara, their coldness was a reminder that survival on these lands was bought at the price of unrelenting scrutiny. Taji stepped forward, voice steady, but carrying the weight of desperation. She stands with me, not as a stranger, but as part of our survival. To reject her is to reject not just a woman, but hope. The murmur shifted, some voices hardening into skepticism, others tinged with quiet fear. Change was a beast many feared more than any enemy. The past was a shadow long cast over Taji's name, a stain not easily scrubbed away. Clara swallowed down the inferno rising inside her and met the nearest elder's gaze without flinching. In that moment, she was more than the sum of her lineage, more than the broken roots of a shattered past. She was a flicker of stubborn will, clinging to life on this bitter land. Later, led away from the council's judgment, Clara found herself within the walls of a modest lodge. The wood smoothed by many hands, the air thick with the earthy scent of woven hides and whispered prayers. The door creaked open, and a young woman stepped inside, eyes sharp as thorn and dark as storm clouds. "You do not belong here," the stranger said plainly, voice colder than the chill seeping through the cracks. "Your blood is not ours, your past a shadow we cannot carry." Clara met that gaze directly, the heat of defiance simmering beneath her calm. "I came with no illusions, nor do I ask for quick acceptance. But the world left me little choice. I chose survival over solitude." The woman's expression flickered, uncertain, maybe grudgingly respectful. "Then survive, but know this: betrayal grows in the silence between truths. Guard well whom you trust." That warning lingered in the air long after the woman left. Clara's chest tightened under the weight of unspoken threats. Meanwhile, beneath the cold watch of the elders, and hidden from Clara's sight, a storm brewed within. The tribe's shadows. Tazi fought not just for acceptance, but for his life and that of the frail alliance wrapping around them like a fragile cloak. Some tribesmen whispered venomous words, their hatred sharpened by years of fear and anger. Some plotted not only to exile him once more, but to ensure his end. Then came the news that tightened the noose. A patrol of colonists was closing in, armed and relentless, tasked with capturing any Apache wandering beyond the borders. The threat outside was now as deadly as the enemies within. Under the cloak of night, beneath skies heavy with unforgiving clouds, the calm shattered. Gunfire erupted suddenly, sharp cracks slicing the quiet, screams tearing through the darkness. Betrayers in the tribe had launched an unexpected attack, their bullets singing betrayal and bloodlust. Clara grabbed Tazzie's arm, the impact of danger raw and immediate. His eyes burned with fierce resolve, tempered by grim calculation. "Run," he commanded softly. "We cannot face them here. Follow the path the mountains know. Few others do." They fled without hesitation, shadows swallowed by the jagged embrace of craggy hills and whispering trees. Every breath was ragged, every step a gamble on uncertain earth. The line between friend and foe blurred with every heartbeat, as the echoing cries of their pursuers chased them like ghosts untethered. Finally, they found a ragged shelter beneath a stony overhang, rough and bare, but a sanctuary from the storm raging behind. Taji pressed his hands to the cold rock, drawing strength from the land's ancient pulse. "This place is merciless," he said, voice gravelly, "but it guards secrets even our hunters don't know." Clara wiped sweat and dirt from her face, eyes tracing the mountain's jagged silhouette as twilight dared to settle. "Is there anywhere left for us, or have we become ghosts on forgotten trails?" The question hung unanswered as the wind shifted, carrying a rough voice across the hollow. From the dark came a silhouette, one they knew too well, a figure carved from past grudges and harsh bargains. His arrival was a blade slicing through their fragile refuge, a choice cast in shadows. The enemy who claimed Taji's blood as debt spoke clear and cold. "Choose wisely, or be destroyed." The crackle of gunfire tore through the cold mountain air, a sharp discord against the stillness that had briefly graced them. Clara barely managed to pull Taji behind a jagged boulder as bullets spat against the rocky ground, sending a plume of dust into the dimming light. Her breath came in ragged bursts, heart pounding a frantic rhythm that echoed the staccato percussion of their attackers' weapons. Taji's eyes blazed, dark pools of stormy resolve, as he pressed his back to the stone, fingers tightening instinctively around the worn leather handle of his revolver. "Run," he whispered, voice low but fierce. "We cannot face them here. The mountain's hidden path offers a chance, a way they don't know." Reluctantly, Clara nodded, every fiber screaming to hold her ground. But the fire in his gaze left no room for argument. Clenching her jaw, she followed him into the tangled embrace of the craggy hills, shadows swallowing their flight. The harsh cries of betrayal and anger behind them chased like ghosts, urging their every hurried step. The path they took was narrow and treacherous. the earth beneath their boots, cracked and restless. Wind howled mournfully through skeletal branches, and cold fingers of night brushed against exposed skin. Each step demanded relentless caution, the terrain punishing the slightest miscalculation. As they climbed higher, the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance, swallowed by the vast wilderness and jagged rocks. Yet safety was elusive, more a fragile concept than a promise. Clara's lungs burned, the cold air biting deep, while her mind raced with questions only the darkness could hold. Taji moved beside her with a wary grace, the weight of his exile heavy in every measured stride. "They came for more than just my capture," he said quietly, voice roughened by fatigue. "They want to silence the hope I carry, not just for me, but for those who might stand with me." She looked at him, eyes shining with newfound strength beneath the veil of exhaustion. "We carry more than survival now," she answered. "We carry the embers of something new, something worth fighting for." Their fragile alliance, born from desperate necessity, now felt like a living force, a stubborn spark defiantly glowing amid the storm of enemies. Yet beneath that flicker lay the sharp edge of betrayal, a wound inflicted by those who should stand beside them. Arriving late into the shadowed folds of their hidden refuge, they found a modest shelter cradled by ancient stones. The fire they lit was a thin slice of warmth against the biting chill, casting long, restless shadows that seemed to whisper both hope and warning. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the walls close in, yet oddly sheltering. "What kind of danger pulls at us so fiercely from all sides?" she asked, her voice barely breaking the tense silence. Taji's gaze hardened. "There are forces within my own tribe that reject my return. They see me as a threat, a fracture in the fragile peace. These factions would see us destroyed before the colonists even draw a bead." The weight of those words hung heavy, pressing down like the unforgiving stones outside. Clara's mind churned. This battle spilled beyond the tangible threat of pistoleros and patrols. It was a war of shadows and whispers, of broken loyalties and old vendettas. Suddenly, the wind shifted, carrying with it a subtle, almost imperceptible sound. A soft footfall, cautious and deliberate, breaking the fragile quiet. Clara's breath caught. Fingers instinctively reached for the worn revolver hidden beneath her cloak. From the darkness stepped a figure cloaked in dusk, a woman with eyes sharp and unyielding, her presence as commanding as the mountain itself. A chill slipped through the shelter like a blade as she surveyed the pair. "You carry a burden heavier than you realize." The woman's voice cut through the night, resolute and unwavering. "Your shadows threaten to unravel the delicate threads that hold this land together." Taji met her gaze squarely, his jaw clenched but voice steady. "We seek no war, only survival. Our fight is to live, not to ignite old flames." The woman's eyes flicked to Clara, an outsider whose bloodlines marked her as foreign. "Survival bears a price. Your presence here could ignite a blaze long extinguished. Trust is fragile. Tread carefully." Clara felt the weight of that warning settle deep, mingling uneasily with the warmth of the fire and the chill of the night air. She pressed her hand to Taji's, finding in his steady grip a lifeline against the growing tide of uncertainty. Days bled into nights as tensions twisted tighter like the mountain winds around them. Inside the secluded enclave of Apache elders, Clara sensed the cold currents of judgment sliding beneath polite nods and terse greetings. She moved with eyes lowered, an unspoken outsider to a world built on ancient trust and fierce loyalty. Taji's once commanding presence had been reduced to a shadow among wary glances and whispered doubts. The council's murmurs spoke of danger brought by an outsider's blood, of fragile allegiances strained beneath the weight of secrets too long buried. One evening, as a pale moon carved silver edges along the rugged silhouettes, Clara found herself alone in a modest room where the air was thick with the scent of herbs and old smoke. The door creaked open, and a young woman stepped in, bearing the quiet authority of one born to watch and judge. Her eyes, like shards of obsidian, penetrated Clara's guarded calm. "You do not belong here," she said bluntly. "Your past shadows this place, and your presence endangers what little peace remains." Clara met the gaze without recoil, voice steady though her heart trembled. "I do not ask for blind acceptance. I ask only for the chance to live, to survive." The woman's expression faltered, a fleeting dance of grudging respect passing through the cold storm in her eyes. "Survive, then. But know this, betrayal breeds not in an axe, but in silence. Choose your confidence wisely." That night, beneath the canopy of stars veiled by restless clouds, news arrived that tightened the noose around their fragile sanctuary. A patrol of armed colonists edged ever closer, relentless in their pursuit of any Apache beyond safe borders. The threat of capture and death loomed like a dark specter, pressing from the edges of their world. Taji's voice was grim as he shared the news with Clara beneath a hooded sky. "They come for me, but if they find me here, they will bring ruin to us both." Her fingers curled around his, the resolve in her eyes igniting like flint against stone. "Then we have no choice but to move on, before night falls with their guns in tow." Before the hour of departure, betrayal struck harder than any bullet. Hidden foes within the tribe launched a sudden assault, raining gunfire upon their refuge with merciless fury. Clara barely managed to drag Taji to cover. Even as the sound of shattering wood and cries of battle pierced the air, Taji's voice cut through chaos. "Run. The mountains harbor paths unknown. Follow me, quickly." They slipped through narrow crevices and shadowed trails, the abyss of mountain darkness pressing close. Each step was a gamble. On survival, the line between friend and enemy dissolving into a whisper of doubt and fear. Finally, hidden beneath a jagged overhang, they caught their breath. The weight of exile compressed their bodies, yet their spirits clung to the fragile hope that still flickered. But the night was not done with them. From the darkness emerged a figure etched in past hatred, the enemy who once bore grudges stained in blood, now offering a choice steeped in treachery. His voice was cold steel. "Choose wisely, or be destroyed." The crackle of gunfire faded into the cold mountain night, leaving a heavy silence that pressed on Clara and Taji like the weight of all they carried. Their breaths came ragged, hearts still pounding from the sudden attack that had shattered their fragile sanctuary. Behind the jagged rocks, Clara clung to Taji's side, the steady beat of his pulse grounding her in a world suddenly raw and uncertain. "We can't stay here," Taji whispered, eyes scanning the darkening ridges. "The mountain's path awaits, a secret that few know and fewer follow." His voice bore the tired strength of a man who had run most of his life, yet refused to surrender. Clara nodded, feeling the sharp sting of cold biting through the thin fabric of her coat. Her hand tightened on the revolver hidden beneath her cloak, a silent vow echoing in her bones. Survival was no longer just about self, it was about them, their union forged in desperation and hardened in fire. They slipped into the shadowed embrace of the crags, the narrow trail weaving upward like a lifeline. Each step was a battle against exhaustion and fear, but the promise of refuge pulled them onward. The mountains loomed like silent sentinels, ancient, unforgiving, yet somehow safer than the enemies stalking them below. As the first gray light bled into the dawn, they reached a sheltered hollow carved by nature's ancient hands. The cool air carried a trace of smoke and whispered memories. Here, Clara allowed herself a fleeting moment to breathe, the tension coiling in her shoulders, loosening just enough to glimpse hope. Taji crouched beside a makeshift fire, fingers tending faint embers that fluttered like restless souls. "The war we face is not just gunfire and shadows," he said, voice low but unwavering. "Within my own tribe, old wounds fester. Some see me as a threat, a crack in the fragile peace we fought to build. They would rather see us broken than united." Clara's eyes met his, shining with quiet courage. "Then, this battle is as much about trust as it is about survival." He nodded slowly. "We carry more than fear. We carry hope. But hope is fragile, and enemies lurk where we least expect." Their moment was shattered by a subtle movement along the ridge. Clara's hand instinctively hovered near her weapon, muscles tensing like coiled springs. From the morning mist emerged a figure, the enemy who had haunted Taji's past, cloaked in the cold certainty of old grudges and silent betrayal. His eyes were knives, his voice a deadly calm that sliced through the fragile quiet. "Choose wisely," he said, voice like steel on stone. "Your union threatens everything. Walk my path or be destroyed." Taji rose, squared his shoulders against the weight of history and fate. "We choose life, together." The rival's lips twisted, but he retreated, a shadow, swallowed by the shifting light. The threat was neither gone nor forgotten, but for now, the fragile thread of their alliance held firm. Days melded into nights beneath the watchful gaze of the desert stars. Clara and Taji pressed onward, seeking the heart of the tribe's elders, the keepers of old laws and fragile peace. Each mile was a test of body and spirit, but Clara's determination hardened. No longer just the desperate woman who had said yes to marriage for survival. She was a partner, a force ignited by shared struggle. When they reached the council fire, Clara stepped forth with measured calm, the eyes of the elders burning with suspicion and reserved power. The murmurs swept the circle like a restless wind. An outsider among those bound by blood and tradition. The council leader's voice cracked through the night air. You bring a woman from outside. Her presence stirs the delicate balance we guard. Trust is earned, not given. Clara's voice was steady, carrying the steel forged in endless hardship. I ask not for blind acceptance. I offer my loyalty, my fight, for the survival of this people and the peace we seek. Taji stood beside her, his shadow long and unwavering. To reject her is to reject hope itself. The elders' faces bore lines carved by time and war. But in that moment, something shifted. The council's silence deepened, not as judgment, but as contemplation. Among them, a few eyes softened, recognizing the courage born not of lineage, but of living. Still, whispers of mistrust lingered like cold drafts, a reminder that acceptance was a journey, not a gift. In the quiet hours after, the council dispersed. A young woman approached Clara, eyes sharp, voice tempered. You walk a narrow path. Your blood is not of us, and your past shadows these lands. Trust is fragile, betrayals abound. Clara met her gaze without faltering. Then I will walk carefully, for survival is never easy. The words hung between them, a bridge forged in mutual understanding and wary respect. Suddenly, the harsh rumble of hooves and the flicker of torches pierced the night. The colonists' patrol had arrived, relentless, unyielding, eyes set on finding any Apache who dared stray. Taz's face darkened. They come for me. If they find me here, they bring ruin to us both. Clara clasped his hand firmly, her voice a vow carried through the rising wind. Then we move, together. Before the dawn could break, treachery struck. The hidden faction within the tribe surged with gunfire and ruthless intent. Bullets tore through the campsite, shouts and chaos erupting like a storm, too fierce to contain. Clara pulled Taji down, hearts pounding in desperate unison. Run, he commanded, fierce and clear. The mountains hold paths unseen by many. They fled through tangled ravines, their silhouettes swallowed by the jagged shadows. Every breath was a prayer, every step a defiance of the death that pursued them. At last, beneath an ancient overhang, they paused, battered, breathless, but unbroken. Taji pressed his palm to the cold earth, drawing strength from the land's eternal pulse. This refuge may be our last, but the fight is far from over. Clara's eyes glimmered with hard-won hope. Whatever comes next, we face it as one. In the dim light, a figure emerged, the enemy, who bore grudges written in blood and betrayal, his presence a test cast in iron. His words were chill steel. Choose wisely, or be destroyed. Clara and Taji exchanged a look heavy with history and determination. Their answer was unspoken but clear, a vow to fight, to forge a new path from the ashes of their past. As the first rays of dawn broke over the rugged peaks, the fragile peace born of survival glimmered, uncertain yet fiercely alive. Together, they stepped forward into the uncertain light, bound by a love unexpected, a trust hard-earned, and the unyielding will to survive and endure. In the end, Their union stood not just as a pact of survival, but as a promise that amid the harshest lands, even the most unlikely bonds can blaze a trail toward hope and new beginnings.